Hi guys, it's been almost 3 years since I've posted a video here, and almost about that same amount of time since I've really done anything on the boat. There's been a lot of things happening in life, but the boat project is still on, and I'm hoping to get back to it now and start getting more things done on it. So the tarp that's covering the boat behind me has been on there for the last winter, and before that for the previous 2 winters, and there was another tarp that finally fell apart. But the boat is still dry and protected under there, and before I can take the tarp off, I need to get the canvas top ready to put back on the boat. And that canvas top, the canvas is in good shape, but the Eisenglass, or whatever you want to call the windows, is really old, really brittle, and really cracked. Now in the past when I was working on it, I just taped over some of the cracks, but it's gone beyond that. So that's the first thing I need to tackle, is getting new windows onto the top. And once that's ready, I can pull the tarp off, put the canvas top on the boat, and get to work on it. Hi guys, so this is where I'm working today. This is my trusty old Singer 1591 sewing machine that I originally purchased when I was working on my smaller boat to do the boat upholstery. Great machine. Been a long time since I used it, so it took me a while to figure out how to do it again. And so what I'm doing today is, right here I have the last piece of the top that I'm working on. I've already done the other ones, but I'm showing you what I did on the other ones on this piece. And to do the job, obviously you need your old boat top, and then you need to buy some, here's an offcut of some of the clear vinyl, Eisenglass, Strata glass. There's different brands you can buy. So I bought some of that from a local supplier, and measured out roughly what I thought I needed. I think I bought a lot more than I needed, but that's okay, better that than not enough. Just to show you, this old material is pretty bad. It's got holes in it, it's cracked, you can barely see through it. It used to be a tinted material on the original top. It's got mold on it and all kinds of weird stuff growing on it. I have taped over some of the holes in the past with some clear tape just so I could work on it, but that's now sticky and falling apart, and it's just very brittle and hard and falling apart, so it needs to be replaced no matter what. So what I wanted to do was get this top ready so that I can take the canvas off the boat, or so I can take the tarp off the boat and get the canvas top onto the boat. And so that's what I've been doing. And now my wife does a lot of sewing, so we have several of these seam rippers around. It's got a little point on it and a kind of a little hook, so you can just go along. And essentially what I've done with all of them is go through on the way this top was built is there's the canvas, and then there's a double stitching around each side of the vinyl window. And so what I've done is I have gone through and basically with this seam ripper gone through and unhooked or cut off every little loop in the stitches around. It's a bit of a time-consuming process. So by doing that, I can get the vinyl, essentially all of it, out of the canvas top and put new stuff in. Now, I've seen a number of YouTube videos where they instead of doing it this way, they just score the other side, sew the new stuff onto the inside with a piece of paper in between to protect it and things like that. And then they rip out the old stuff out of the way. But then, from what I found, at least with this, because it's so hard and brittle on some of these pieces, I would still leave a fairly substantial strip of the old vinyl between the canvas and the new vinyl. And I really didn't want to end up doing that. So that's what I've been doing. There's different ways of doing it. This is what I've been doing. So on this piece, I have removed all of the stitching all the way around, and then what I now need to do is get it down on the floor, and then what I do is peel up. You can see this edge. So I peel the edge up, and then I'm going to cut it around the outside. Before I do that, however, what I need to do is cut a new piece of that vinyl to fit in here exactly so it's the right size to fit and replace. And I go in here, so I lay it on the floor, and then I just put the new vinyl over top and just mark out at the exact dimensions up to the edge of the fabric from the zippers. So I know that when I put it back in, I'm going to have the same size and shape as what this is now, but without the cracked vinyl. So that's what I'm going to move to doing now. So what I've done here is I've laid it on the floor with the inside up so I can see to the edge of the zippers, the old vinyl, this dark sort of shiny stuff. And then I've laid the new clear vinyl on top. And then the next thing I need to do is, without moving this, I just go along and go with the Sharpie like this, mark to the edges of where I can see the fabric of the zipper going. So nothing too complicated, just draw a line along here, knowing that as I cut it, I'll kind of straighten out the little wiggles in the line. This is just to give me a line for cutting with the scissors. Really fairly easy to do. And in case you're wondering why I don't just line up a straight edge, is that when you are cutting this vinyl, or when you're looking at the old top, you'll find that a lot of these edges, even though they look like they're straight, they actually have a slight curve to them. If you straighten it all out, your roof is not going to fit together anymore. Your canvas top's not going to fit together. And so it's important to pay attention to what the actual shape of it is. And so I just go along here. So now what I've done is I've got a piece marked out on the new clear vinyl that's the same size as what the original window is. So when I remove it, I know where it's going to be. So the other thing I like to do is put something on here, like just put top, and I can read that. Now, the reason I write something other than just a little squiggle is I need to be able to tell which side is supposed to be up. If I flip it over and I read it, it's going to be backwards. And the reason for that is this is clear vinyl. Once I cut it out, it's going to look the same from both sides. Even though it's not fully symmetrical, it might not be so clear which way it needs to go on once this is cut into having nothing more than the edges. And if I put it on the wrong way and sew it together like that, my roof is not going to fit together. So I just want to mark it. And where I wrote this on here is where the vinyl overlaps the canvas. So even though the writing is going to stay there, you're never going to be able to see it from the outside of the boat because it's hidden by the canvas. So that's marked. So the next step for that would be to cut it out. So the next thing I do is take the piece, turn it over, lay it on a clean piece of plywood just so I have a cutting surface. Take a knife with a sharp blade, and then I just peel it back like this. Now, if you look at the other side, there is a little bit of overlap from the zipper fabric. You don't want to cut into that, but you want to cut closer to it. So at this point, what I do is I just take the knife and I cut all the way around like this. And in the corners here, you have to kind of be careful, make sure nothing's stuck underneath there. And, you know, of course, be careful you don't cut your fingers. And then cut back in like that. You can see where all the holes are for the stitching. You want to make sure you stay on the outside of that all the way around, because the new stitching is going to go roughly in the same location. So, same thing, pull the corner, figure out where I want to start the cutting. Same deal, watch you don't cut the canvas, of course. And that's cut, and now I will spin it around and I think do the last cut. You can see how it's all coming apart here. Same thing, find the corner, cut to the outside of the stitching lines, and make sure you don't cut into the fabric of either the canvas or the zipper. The old vinyl is removed. So the next thing I would do is you need to go along and just remove the old threads that you pulled apart from the stitching. It's just going to be messy having them there. So once you've picked all the stitches off on the back side with your seam ripper, this should all come off fairly easily. It's just a bit messy and time consuming, but beyond that, not too bad. And then the next thing is just go through, and what I like to do is just go through and pick all these extra threads off until the whole thing looks nice and clean. So now I've cleaned up all of the messy leftover stitching from the edges of the canvas. I've laid the canvas back out on the floor, tried to get as flat as I can, and with the inside facing up because that's where I'm putting the vinyl. And I have placed the new vinyl on top, and I try to line it up with the zippers the way I traced the line on it originally. Try to do that all the way around. And generally what I like to do is start taping, like locating the bottom, because the bottom has the least overlap. Up here, there's a fair bit of overlap, so if it's off a little bit, it is fabric, you do have a little bit of forgiveness. But in the bottom down here, you're dealing with probably less than a ½ inch of overlap. So, of course, the way your canvas top is made could be different than this one, so everything I'm doing here is not exactly going to be the same necessarily, because different people building canvas tops may do it differently. What I'm doing here now is I am going to try to get this bottom edge in. There's a little piece that goes around both sides of it. It's different than the side, so it's kind of the trickiest part, has the least overlap with the canvas. So it's kind of a critical part to get correct. So I will tape that on here. The other trick is when you're taping it, you want to make sure that you don't put tape, if possible, over where you're sewing, because then you're trying to have to pick tape out of your stitches, which, although it's possible, it's not fun. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of an edge here to sew along, even though I will be sewing from the other side, just so it doesn't get caught in the stitching. Okay, I've located the bottom now. Now I'll just do a bit of an alignment on the top. This should work okay. I can feel making sure that the vinyl is overlapping the canvas properly. Making sure the zipper is not going under the vinyl here. and then just putting this along. I think I put it over too far. What I don't want to do is put this tape over top of the outer line of stitching. So I want to leave room again, like I was mentioning at the bottom there, to be able to sew this without sewing through the tape. So that should work there. Now I do the same thing on this side. That should work. And then I will do the same thing across the top. And like I said, I can read the top the correct way around because I labeled this. If I had put this vinyl on the other way, sometimes it's a little bit hard to see which way it goes on, but then the dimensions end up being wrong. Now, I've got this taped in place, but the next thing I want to do, and I discovered this by trial and error, is I want to tape the other side, because what happens is if I don't tape this side and I just start sewing, it will tend to distort the canvas in relation to the vinyl, and then it'll end up being bunched up when I get down farther. And we don't want that to happen. So for the first strip of sewing, I just put, because I'm doing a double stitch on it, what I do is for the first time around, I put this tape on this side as well to hold it in place. Do the first round of stitching all the way around. Then I remove the tape. So there, we have the vinyl, new vinyl in the canvas, ready to be sewn. So that will be the next thing I get to. So now here I've got the canvas with the vinyl taped into it in the sewing machine. I am going to start with the outer line of stitching, because that's the one that's exposed and doesn't have any tape on it. So we'll work our way around, and hopefully we don't break any needles or break the thread. I'm not sure how much bobbin thread I have in here, so there's a possibility that will end or run out before I get done. Got a little bit of the zipper catching on the sewing machine here, so I gotta move that. I can see where the old stitching was, so I'm trying to follow those lines more or less. I mean, if it's not perfect, it's okay, but the more I can follow the same lines, the better, to hopefully plug up some of those holes and cover it up and keep them nice and tight. And so now I am halfway around with the first line of stitching. The bottom one is always a little trickier to do, but we'll see what it's like when I get there. This one's going to be a lot more fun because, unlike the other panels I've done, I've got this extra piece. This is the canvas from the back of the boat, and it's actually two large panels. That's like one big panel, but the door that opens, so it's actually got two sections of window, and it's all one piece at the top, so I can't separate it. So that's why I thought I would remove the old vinyl from the large section first, then the small one, sew the small one together because it's easier to handle with this. Otherwise I'd be dealing with this large panel flopping around while I'm trying to do around the small panel. So I hope I made the right decision. I don't know for sure, but that's the way I'm trying to do it. And I always wonder what I'm going to knock off the table next because it's a bit messy doing this whole thing, but that's okay. Let's see what happens here. I'm surprised I haven't run out of bobbin thread yet, because I can't remember when I changed it last, but it seems to be working fine. Now, the reason this old 1950s Singer 1591, I think is the number on it, is such a good sewing machine for this type of thing is, first of all, you can buy it rather affordably. But it's a gear drive unit. The motor actually runs through a worm gear system in here rather than a belt drive. So that gives it a lot more torque. You don't have a belt slipping all the time, things like that. So it isn't an industrial machine, but it's a heavy duty home use machine. I'm going to go backwards just a little bit, try to line this up. Oh, a little too far. Sometimes in the thicker parts where I may be hitting extra stitching or vinyl, it needs just a little bit of help to get it rolling. I mean, your sewing machine, well, you'll have to see it. I'm not sure what you guys would have for a sewing machine, but hopefully you can figure out how to use your own for doing this kind of thing. But if you're looking for a cool old looking, vintage looking sewing machine that is actually quite useful for doing this kind of thing, these Singer 1591s are a nice machine. So this one, what I'm really wanting to make sure, because there isn't a lot of overlap, this is the bottom edge, I want to try to make sure that I stay on the vinyl. And so I'm going to go kind of as close to the tape as I can here. I'm not going to worry so much about the old stitching lines, but just go by feel to where I can feel the vinyl is there underneath. And this is just to make sure I'm getting on the right track. And then let's see what happens. It's going through quite a few layers here, so it sometimes needs a little bit of help to get moving. And there I've done one row of stitching around the entire window. So now I can move the tape, both sides. It's amazing how when you try to get tape to stick, it won't sometimes, and then sometimes it just won't let go. And this stuff is sticking very well to the fabric. So this is what I meant. I got a little bit of tape stuck in the stitching. I'll have to pick that out later. The main thing is it's holding together. I still have room right here to put another row of stitching to strengthen the bottom because there isn't a lot of overlap. And I will do the same thing around the outside. But now that I've got one row, it will hold it in place while I run the second row of stitching on here. Then I've got to do it with the other one. I won't bore you to death by showing you more of that. But here is one of the other completed windows that I've already done double stitching all the way around. And ready to put back in the boat. So this is what I'm working on right now. Once I get this last bit sewn together and we get a nice day, because it looks like it's going to rain today, I'm going to go pull the tarp off the boat, get the canvas top on the boat. Oh, the other thing I need to do that I didn't mention earlier is some of these things had these snaps or domes or whatever you want to call them, that were right where I needed to sew or where the vinyl was. So some of those I had to take a drill and take them out. So I'm going to have to go to either the canvas top supply place, but I think Home Depot even sells them. I'm need to go and get some more of those snaps and put them back in the top. The holes are already in the canvas, so it's easy to figure out exactly where they go. So I'm going to need to replace those. And once I've done that, the canvas top is going to go back on the boat, and then I can actually start working on the boat again after almost 3 years. The other thing that I have been a little bit concerned about with this boat is, if you have watched my older videos, this boat came with it's a 1974 boat, so it came with a Mercruiser. It was the Ford 302 V8 with a Holley 4-barrel carburetor and the old TR drive. Now those were very strong, robust drives, but especially in the past few years, even since I got the boat, parts have become extremely difficult to find for those because they are an obsolete line. Mercruiser started the Alphas, the smaller ones, and have kept progressing on that product line for a long time. And then the TR drives were effectively replaced by the Bravo drives. So the TR drive, which was an interesting setup, kind of became a dead-end product line that ended, and there's no parts being manufactured for them by Mercruiser, or to my knowledge by anybody else. And it's kind of a unique line. It needs a different transom cutout than the Alphas or the Bravos. It uses a small Mercury-built Merc transmission between the engine and the drive, so forward, neutral, reverse switching is all done by the transmission, not by the outdrive unit. And as a result, there's some extra complexity or extra components to the system. The Merc trans unit used an electric motor for shifting, which I've heard can cause some issues with people, or if it stops working, it can make the transmission slip and things like that. So I've had in the back of my mind, even though my unit looks good, the engine, I've had it apart and I've put new rings in it and it looks ready to go. I am a little bit concerned about reinstalling that whole unit in my boat when I don't know if I'll be able to get parts for it down the line. So I currently am on the lookout for another drive unit and engine, and I think I've found one. I will know by next weekend, I guess, once I hear it running, and then I'll let you know more about it. It will be from everything I understand, a substantial upgrade to the boat, and not a cheap upgrade, but if I want it to be reliable for my wife and I to go out for any length of time on larger bodies of water, I want a power plant and a drive system that I feel I can rely on, and if it does break, something that I can get parts for. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to tackle next. So once I get this canvas top on the boat, I'll be able to access the inside of the boat instead of crawling under the tarp every time. And underneath that tarp, it gets so hot in the sun, and it's also very dark to work. So once I get that on, and then I get the engine and outdrive question answered, then I will probably start by installing the new engine in the outdrive that I'm looking at getting that in there, and then just start progressing with everything else and trying to get everything else finished up in the cabin and in the boat. My current hope, things have gone sideways a little bit over the last few years. My current hope is to have the boat ready by the end of this summer or early fall, so that I can launch it in the spring and use it next summer. I'm trying to keep my goals realistic, because I know that I have a lot of other things I need to do as well. For anybody who's been wondering what's been going on after posting all my videos and then coming to a sudden stop back in 2020, it had a lot to do with not so much the pandemic, as a lot of people would have guessed, but more to do with the failing health of my parents. They both lived upstairs in this house. We have a separate apartment upstairs. My mom had had a major stroke. My dad was the primary caregiver for my mom, but by summer of 2020, he was starting to have a lot of issues of his own, and I ended up spending a lot of time helping them, taking care of them, trying to figure out what I was going to do to take care of them. And long story short, things got more and more difficult. My mother ended up passing away in the fall of 21, and my dad followed her less than 3 months later in the winter of 2022. And so it's been a crazy time trying to deal with all of the repercussions of that, dealing with it leading up to that, and then things afterwards. So working on the boat just wasn't a priority, but that is all in the past now. Life goes on. So I will be trying to get as much done on the boat as I can, starting with the top, working on the engine, and then hopefully we'll actually get something done. So hopefully this video is helpful for somebody who's wanting to replace the windows in their canvas top, or was wondering how to do it, or wondering if they could even do it. It's not all that difficult. I've never done it before in my life. Watched a few YouTube videos, came up with my own modified version of how to do it, and so far it seems to be working okay. So hopefully by the next video, the top will be on the boat, and I will have an update on what I'm doing about an engine. See you next time.